What's up, guys? This is Nick from Arch City Poker, and today's video could be continuing the poker hand review series with today's topic covering a live 2-5 hand where I have to decide, do I bet or do I check to induce to check call? So there is a loose passive ABC player here that limps. I have pocket tens, decide to ISO this player. This is pretty standard, I think, and get a call from a loose player on the button who I think he's loose more in the sense of calling than he is aggressive wise, I guess, like, barreling, raising, that type of thing. So I haven't played with him a whole lot, but he tends to be more loose in a passive way. So we end up seeing the flop three-handed as the limper calls, and it comes ace-9-5. Checks to me, I think it's a really standard line to go ahead and check to check call here. I think you could argue small bet heads up, like third pot, like a block bet to try to get thin value, maybe get a little bit of protection for my tens, but I think it's pretty standard check call here. I think three-handed, four-handed, five-handed, I start to polarize my strategy a little bit, and I think tens work better as a check. So I think check calling makes sense here. Player on the button checks, and the turn comes to ace of clubs, and the player who's out of position to both of us who limp called pre-flop decides to check again. So this is a spot where I think that the player that's out of position can never have ace X, or basically better than my tens, because I think that this player's so ABC, he's not doing anything tricky. I think he would want to bet and get value and protection for any hand that's better than my tens. I think the player on the button, this is where you get more into game theory optimal type of stuff with balance. I don't think this player checks back a whole lot of ace X, maybe ever, on this flop. So I think that it makes sense to go for value with my tens for at least one street here. So I do go ahead and bet 55. I think that's a good sizing. I think this targets a lot of 9x, possibly, maybe hands like pocket sevens, maybe if he decides to flat with a draw, which I think he maybe should be going for a raise with most of his draws here, but it's okay to sometimes show up with some nuttish draws as a flat here if you are balancing your strategies. So he decides to go ahead and call on the button, and the limper goes ahead and folds. And the river comes a four spades, so this is where the topic of this video kind of comes into play. This is a spot where you have to decide, do I bet again and try to go for a second street of value? Is it too thin? Or do I check to possibly induce and check call with a really nice bluff catcher? I think that you just have to make a decision if you have any kind of reads on your opponent. If he's loose, is he loose in the sense that he is capable of firing his missed draws if he did have some draws or some air on this river? Is he possibly more pair heavy and trying to get to showdown, and can you possibly get him to call? I think what's interesting about this hand is because of how dry the flop texture is, I think he might be possibly a little more pair heavy on the turn once he calls me. I think that even really terrible opponents know that the odds of calling with a draw on the turn, just trying to see one card on the river, is usually not correct to call with, essentially. So I think if there would have been a flush draw on the flop and he called twice, there'd be more merit to maybe checking to induce a lot of his missed draws to go ahead and fire. I think, however, as the hand is played, or has been played essentially by him, I really expect him to show up with a lot of possibly hands like 9-8 suited, 9-7 suited, maybe pocket sevens, pocket sixes, pocket eights, of course. I do think he's more pair heavy in the spot, and because I do think he's a little more loose in the sense that he's a little more stationy than he is as an aggressive player, I think it makes sense to bet here. And the thing that's interesting about this spot is if he was a player that was good in the sense that he could balance the flop and show up with some ace X as played, if I go to bet here, I think block bet works really well, and I think it does the best against that kind of range. However, I think that this is where you guys need to try and learn to extract max value in these live low stakes games. I think because he's not balanced and never can really have a better hand, I think I should size this up. And I go ahead and do that and fire 150 into 192 on the river. And he goes ahead and calls, and he mucks. And a couple of the players next to me were very surprised that I decided to bet that large on the river with pocket tens. They all thought I was slow playing ace X plus, essentially. They thought that it was a really risky bet. But the thing is, if you know that he never has better, if your bet can possibly look bluffy, and he's willing to be a little stationy on the river and call with, worse pairs, then why not try to get max value? Now, if I knew that this opponent was more loose in an aggressive sense, and I thought he would fire missed draws, his air, maybe worse pairs trying to get me off a hand like this, then I think check call would work the best. So if you guys have any questions or comments about this hand, go ahead and let me know. Excuse me. As always, until next time, this is Nick from Arch City Poker. Take care.